Welcome, it's the RC Renegade, and today I'm telling the story of when my Arrma Typhon caught on fire. The day that this car, the Arrma Typhon, caught on fire, I had just taken it out for a drive. You see, I had just bought this car a few weeks ago from a guy up in Maryland. I got this car used. I did not buy it brand new. And I had driven it a few times before, and today was just another day. I had taken it out and was driving it in a local parking lot, and all of a sudden, the steering stopped working and the car crashed into a curb. Now, the car wasn't going very fast at the time of impact, but I noticed there was smoke coming out from underneath the cover. Smoke was coming up out of these fins, and there was smoke in the air, and I knew something wasn't right. Right away, instantly. So I ran up to the car, I pulled the cover off, I unplugged the battery, and here is what I found. When I pulled the cover off my RC car, there was smoke everywhere. I unplugged the battery, and once I unplugged the battery, the smoke stopped. At the time, I was pretty scared because I had never experienced an RC car fire before, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. You know, like on TV where they have those accident investigators that look at the wreckage and the car parts to determine what went wrong? Well, in a way, I also was an accident investigator because my RC car had crashed and caught on fire, and I didn't know why. First, I just did like an overview look of the car, and I didn't really see anything wrong, but everything smelled like smoke. An electrical fire has a very unique smell to it. It's acidic. You really can't describe it perfectly. It's something you have to experience yourself. But if you've ever been around an electrical fire, you know what I'm talking about. And this very distinct smell of the electrical smoke and from the fire, from the electronics burning, was very evident. And the whole car smelled of this burning smoke. I was outside in the parking lot, and I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I figured I should take my car inside, and so I took my car inside, and I got it on the kitchen table, and I was just looking over what could have gone wrong, and I noticed the servo. When I mentioned the steering had stopped and I was turning the wheel on the controller, but the steering had stopped working. And so I was inspecting the servo, which is located right here. The servo controls steering on the vehicle. And I was like, well, why is the car not steering? It should have, and it was not. And I actually found that the servo had melted. The servo had caught on fire and melted. I do not have the original servo still. I got rid of it, but I have pictures of it. At the time, I had enough clarity to take a picture of the servo, and I also took a picture of the giant hole that had melted in the side of the servo. So let me show those to you guys right now. At this point, I knew I was getting somewhere. I knew I had found something that was burning and that could be replaced. Now, for those of you who may not know what a servo looks like or what it is, I have one right here. This is not the original servo that came with the car. This is an aftermarket replacement servo. All a servo is there's an electric motor and some gears. And you have your receiver here, and the receiver sends a signal to the servo, which will turn the wheels back and forth. And so here is what a servo looks like. So at the time of this accident, I knew I had to replace the servo because the steering was not working and the servo had caught on fire. So I ordered this aftermarket 35 kilogram cordless digital servo, but this is the Pro version. And so the Pro version is similar to the non-Pro version, but it's a little bit stronger and it's just built a little better. You can see it says Pro right there. In order to do that, this is a 25 tooth servo. The original was a 23 tooth servo. So I had to upgrade this servo arm right here to a 25 tooth servo arm, so it's compatible with these servos here. This is the exact same servo that I run inside this car today, and it works great. It hasn't given me any issues. I may have to replace it again, but for right now, it's working fine. Anyway, let's get back on track. So, as I mentioned before, this servo had caught on fire, the servo in this car, and I was pretty scared just because I had never had something like this happen before, and I did not know if something else was wrong with this car. As I went through, everything else smelled like smoke, and I wasn't sure, even after putting a new servo in, if something else would catch on fire. I contacted the original owner, because you want to do as much homework as you can about the history of a vehicle. Just like in an accident investigation, the investigators will go and say at an airplane, they'll look at the maintenance record of an airplane that has crashed. Well, I wanted to know as much about this car as I could, so I contacted the previous owner. And I specifically asked him, did you set the EPA or endpoint adjustments on this servo? And his reply was, what's an EPA? So at that point, I knew that I was in trouble. For those of you who may not know, an EPA or an endpoint adjustment on a servo is when these wheels turn, when this wheel turns all the way to the left, the servo has to know when the wheels can no longer turn. And if you don't set your EPA or endpoint adjustment, the wheels will turn all the way to the left, like when you tell it to turn, and the servo will keep trying to turn the wheels further because the endpoint has not been adjusted. This will result in the servo overheating and jamming and catching on fire. At the time that I got the car, I had assumed the EPA was set, and looking back, I shouldn't have assumed that, but you live and you learn. So when I got the new servo, which like I mentioned is this exact model of this servo right here, when I got this new servo, I installed it in the car and then I set the endpoint adjustments before I went out and drove the car. Once that happens, these servos are not under a lot of stress, and so they won't catch on fire as easily in the future. So you live and you learn. So all in all, it turns out the only thing that happened was this servo caught on fire. But as I mentioned, the other parts of the car smelled like smoke. And the reason that is this is your ESC or electronic speed control right here, and it has a fan on this ESC. At the time, I was not running these cooling fans, I just had the fan for this ESC. But when the fire broke out on this car, the fan for the ESC sucked all that smoke up and blew the smoke all throughout the rest of the car, which made everything smell like smoke and burned electronics. Fortunately, when I put on a new servo and I turned everything on, everything worked just fine and there were no more issues. But at the time, I didn't know until I tried it that that was the problem. These lipos, for example, have histories of catching on fire, and I wasn't sure if there was something wrong with the battery. If an ESC were to go, in today's market, that costs about $200 to replace. So there's a lot of parts on these cars that are pretty pricey, and so I was thankful that I was only able to get away with replacing a faulty servo, and that was it. So it's a pretty wild story, as you can tell, and you live and you learn and you move on. But I just wanted to share this crazy story I had of when my RC car caught on fire. So hopefully you guys can learn from this and you won't experience the same mistakes that I did. As always, thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and be on the lookout for more videos.